Welcome to Kennedy Saves the World. I am, in fact, still your Kennedalia. I am Kennedy, and I had an interesting story this week on my show that got everyone on the staff of the show talking. And then when we talked about it with the panelists, you know, some people laugh, some people eschew the entire idea that perhaps there is a galactic force, an interspecies galactic force with an understanding between the United States government and LGMs. And in fact, aliens are among us. They're doing studies here. The United States government has a very hush-hush agreement. And this, of course, according to Chaim Eshed, who is an 87-year-old former head of the Israeli Defense Ministry's Space Directorate. That was his job for quite some time, for decades. And now he's like, I'm 87. I'm throwing off the muzzle, and I'm going to tell you exactly what happened. And he said that there are aliens, and he went as far to say that there is a colony deep within the confines and crust of Mars where there are, in fact, aliens and U.S. astronauts working together. So if there are any missing astronauts on the side of milk cartons, fear not. They are probing away in Martian bliss somewhere in the nether regions of the red planet. So that's exciting. The idea that there is a galactic force, I don't know, maybe he said President Trump almost spilled the beans. But then there are people who pleaded with him to stay mum so we could circumvent any mass panic. And my thinking is there's no way that President Trump would be muzzled about anything, alien or otherwise. And mass panic is sort of part of his brand. So I think he would use it to his advantage. So I don't know that I believe that story. I don't know that he's been entrusted with the information. I don't know that the information exists. But I was raised by a mom who very firmly believes in aliens. And so she is the type of person, just like the pre-Socratic philosophers who looked up into the heavens and saw a quadrillion stars. And, you know, she thought to herself, as we all do, there's got to be something else out there. There's got to be a greater explanation that we haven't quite hit on. And a lot of those people, they naturally assume, and I would put myself into that camp, the probability of this being the only planet flung off from a piece of rock from the sun that somehow was hospitable to ever-changing life. There have to be, with 2 trillion galaxies in our universe alone, never mind the multiverse theory. Let's say there is one universe and there's that many galaxies with a quadrillion stars in each of them. The mathematical improbability of our solitude means that there are other things out there. Are they single cell little tiny bits that lived in what was once water and is now ice in various places? Yeah, probably most of them. But if we evolved to look into the heavens and want some order and some explanation and marry that with imagination and curiosity, then clearly there are other people like that. And so if there are others like that, the ultimate question is, have they visited Earth? And, you know, there are those like my mom who feel that there is such a great possibility that there's something out there that they just insert, oh, well, it's got to be aliens. And there are other people who just want to believe. They want to believe that there is a larger story that we're not being told, that someone somewhere is withholding information. And they also believe in the supernatural, because when there are gaps in explanation, it's much easier and more comforting to insert your own. And so people who believe in sort of the blanket supernaturalism, and I was a huge fan of the Art Bell radio show. God rest his soul. I really did. I didn't buy into every single topic on his show, but I loved the curiosity and respect that he gave to various people. And it wasn't just aliens. It was ghosts and Bigfoot and all sorts of supernatural phenomena. And there are people like that who are very interesting to listen to. And I love their curiosity, and I love that they are non-traditional thinkers who won't be told what to believe. But the people whose stories I'm most interested in are the skeptics with scientific backgrounds who have had direct experience that they cannot explain, that are beyond our scientific explanation capabilities. And so that's when you get people like fighter pilots and, even commercial airline pilots who see things, who are trained to categorize and rationally separate what might scare someone else into, different realms that are acceptable and explainable. And when they don't have an explanation, that's when I am all in. So I don't know if they're here. I don't know what they want. I'm really curious to see how they got here and if we can use their technology to finally have flying cars that aren't going to bump into each other, and all of the ways that our lives might be better once our alien overlords arrive. And I'm willing to dust off a cot for them and just know that I'm your friend. I love math. I've seen Contact. I know how it goes. That's why I took calculus as an elective, just so we'd have something to chat about. And I'm not alone in my not aloneness. And now, joining the podcast, Seth Shostak. He's a senior astronomer at the SETI Institute. And he's the one who directs the search for extraterrestrials. He's looking for evidence. He's looking for intelligence out there in the great beyond. And SETI started as a NASA-funded project. Dr. Shostak has a PhD in astronomy from Caltech, which is next to UCLA, the finest technological institute in the entire country. So take that, MIT. Dr. Shostak, thank you so much for being here. I'm delighted to have you.
It's a real pleasure, Kennedy. And I take it maybe you went to UCLA. I don't know.
Oh, my gosh, I did. How did you know? Yes, go Bruins. Well, that's so exciting.
Wild guess.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the things that pilots have seen, either in the military or commercial pilots. And when we finally get sort of public examples of these highly trained individuals, is that a way for governments to sort of soften the beach so we slowly come to accept the realization that aliens are either here or they're going to visit real soon? What is your take?
Well, here's my take. I hope this doesn't disappoint you, Kennedy, but the facts are that roughly 1/3 of the American public, and 1/3 of the public in Europe and Australia, Japan, any of these sort of first, second world countries. I'm not sure which ones are the second world countries, but 1/3 of the population is down with the idea that indeed the aliens are here buzzing the skies. Mm-hmm. So, it's not a fringe belief. I mean, 11%, I think it is, of the population thinks Santa Claus is real, but 11% of the population is under the age of 9. So, that may not mean quite the same thing. A lot of people think it's true, and most of those people think that the feds are covering up, that they know the aliens are here, and they don't want to tell the public because the public couldn't handle the
What
news.
Do you think about that?
Well, I think it's silly because, in fact, the public could handle the news, right? 1/3 of them believe it already. If you were to open up your browser tomorrow or pull the paper off your driveway and it said, government confirms aliens visiting Earth, would you start rioting in the streets? Would you go completely nuts? Would you quit your job? Would you kick the spouse out?
No.
Would you, stop
maybe
watering
the last
plants?
One. No, but you know what I would do? I would immediately go buy more toilet paper because I know that that's what people are going for first. I've got enough canned beans. All right, it's not going to be a pleasant place in my domicile because all we got is beans, quinoa, and oatmeal. So it's you're going to have a gassy chassis or two in my village. But people freak out over toilet paper, but I think this is the perfect time because people have been working from home. There's so much uncertainty. They've seen the seams of society falling apart with, various riots and skirmishes and protests that become violent. And so now I think is the best time because it might actually be the most unifying news we could get, because we're so used to this us versus them mentality. You know, Democrat versus Republican, black versus white, men versus women. And finally, you know, because we've already subjugated all the animals, finally we would have something else to other that would unify human beings. So in that way, I don't think it would be the worst thing in the world.
Well, I don't either. I mean, one thing you can say about the aliens, if you are inclined to believe that they're really here, is that they're the best house guests ever. I mean, look, they don't do anything. They don't kill anybody. They don't they don't help us with anything. You know, they haven't cured cancer for us. They haven't done anything. And in fact, you know, they're like 100,000 commercial airline flights every day in the world. They don't interfere with them. They don't file a flight plan saying, well, we're going to be going over the, you know, Chicago airport tomorrow morning. But, you know, the United Airlines doesn't pay any attention to that. The aliens, if they're here, are totally invisible. They do nothing of interest. So I wouldn't worry if somebody came out and said, look, I got better evidence.
No, but if you have evidence, then you're absolutely right. If they have found a way to harness the space-time continuum and not dissolve when they travel from there to here, because there is very far away. So if they have that technology, then please share it so we can stop using things like streetlights and highways. And if there is a way to build a hyperloop, you know, maybe they've got an in on some materials. Maybe they know a guy who can help us build something. And if they are able to dematerialize and then gather themselves back together, then they know something about cellular composition, which means that they could help us eradicate those bad cells like cancer. Now, was there ever a time when you were a researcher, because you've been doing this for a long time, where you're listening like Jodie Foster on Contact, and you've got the headphones on and the radio telescopes pointed at the heavens? Was there ever anything that really genuinely freaked you out?
Well, indeed, you get signals all the time. I mean, I think the movies have conveyed this impression that indeed we're sitting around with earphones on, you know, doing crossword puzzles, practicing our putting, doing something to alleviate the boredom, waiting for that signal. But of course it isn't like that, because we don't know where on the dial the signal might be coming in. So we actually listen to currently, 70 million channels simultaneously.
Wow.
That's 35 million pairs of earphones. That'd be really uncomfortable. So, you know, we're not doing that. But we do get signals, as I say all the time. They're mostly, well, almost all now, you know, satellites around the Earth that are, you know, sending out pictures of the weather or tanks in Iraq or whatever they're sending down. And we pick up those signals. So that's a confusion. That's obviously not ET. But there was a time when we got a signal that was so intriguing that we were all sitting around looking at the computers at 3 a.m, thinking, you know, I personally was thinking, this is going to be really rough if it's really ET, because, you know, I've got all these lunches scheduled, these meetings, and so forth and so on. And within 6 hours, the New York Times was calling me up to say, you know, what about that signal? So it was public knowledge essentially immediately. It turned out not to be ET.
Has anything been ET? Have we gotten a signal from someone or something somewhere?
Listen, Kennedy, if we had picked up a signal, you know, I mean, I would have some sort of gold coin from an organization in Stockholm, Sweden, on the mantle here.
Yep.
You know, I'd have my Nobel Prize, and everybody in the world would know about it. There's no way to keep it secret, and there's no plan to keep it secret. And in fact, you couldn't keep it secret. So if we'd found them, you'd know about it. Alas.
Oh man, I do. So what do you think of, you know, like the USS Nimitz, one of the ships in the strike carrier group, saw a bubbling oval beneath the ocean surface that was spotted by a couple of fighter pilots. You know, or in New Jersey, just down the road, there was a formation of V-lights that a bunch of people saw at the same time. So what about this type of phenomena that's seen? What do you explain that as?
Well, you have to look at those things sort of one by one. You know, you can't make too many blanket statements or even quiltic statements. I'll make a blanket statement, though, anyhow. And that is this. these are mostly witness testimony. Kennedy, I hear from people every day. People send me emails. They call me up, right? They'll mail me packages with things. And that's because they're having difficulties with aliens in their personal lives, or they claim that they have the incontrovertible evidence. There used to be 10,000 reports of things in the sky every year. And a lot of them are from what you might call reputable witnesses, airline pilots, military pilots, whatever. But that kind of evidence is called an evidence. It's an argument from authority. This person is a military pilot. So if they say they saw an alien spacecraft cutting them off at, 30,000 feet, because they're military pilots, you say, well, Bob, that must be for real.
But if I were screwing around on an airplane and I looked out to my right and saw a bunch of lights and had no idea, I would say, oh my gosh, that was a UFO. Whereas the pilot would say, no, it's actually, these three other illusions from the atmosphere that we see every day. So, I don't know that it's that much of a fallacy if your training is to dismiss things. And it's not like it's not like pilots are just jumping around delighted that there might be an alien sitting on the wing terrorizing William Shatner.
Yeah, well, he deserves to be terrorized, I guess.
Maybe.
It could be, but a military pilot a military pilot told me a couple of interesting things because he looked at all those videos and he thought he understood what they all were. They were mostly phenomena within the camera itself, or, other things that happen in the course of training. I've got to wonder myself if the only people that can see the aliens are Navy pilots flying F-18 Super Hornets. That's like, you drive around in the Pacific Northwest in a Buick, some guy in a Buick, and he sees Bigfoot. But the only people that can ever see Bigfoot are Buick drivers. You might at some point say, you know what? It might be Bigfoot, but it might be something with that Buick, right? So I can't buy into that. That's witness testimony. You wouldn't convict somebody of a murder simply on the basis of somebody who you think is a reasonable guy, has a decent job.
No, but I do think there's a different threshold because that's beyond a reasonable doubt. And some of these things are unprovable. And that's why, I realize that science and the scientific method is not to be applied willy-nilly to the gaps. If there is a gap, therefore we have to ascribe this one very complicated thing. That's sort of the opposite of what the system is supposed to do. But, there are mysteries. There are things that we don't know. There are things that are unknowable. And, within that, there are also probabilities. And that's, the idea that there are unknowns and probabilities is, I'm guessing, why SETI was born in the first place. So my question is, if aliens show up and they're hostile, do we have any defenses against them other than squirting water on the wires in their spaceships?
Yeah, water always seems to be their nemesis for some reason.
Oh, yeah.
Well, yeah, no, I think that the only tactic that might have a chance is to negotiate. Because look, this is a mistake that every sci-fi movie makes, right? In the sci-fi movies, what happens? The aliens come to Earth. That's always a good thing. Saves on, building sets. All right, they come to Earth, and the first thing they do is flatten Los Angeles. Now, look, I'm in Northern California. From my point of view, if they want to flatten Los Angeles, okay by me. I really don't have a problem with that. But they do that. Now, if you say, no, wait a minute, we got to stop them. We got to get these top guns to get in there and take them on. And they do in the movies, and they win in the movies. That's totally nonsense. Because if they can come here, their technology is so far beyond ours, they can do whatever they want. It would be like the U.S. military taking on a small squad of Neanderthals. The Neanderthals can think they're going to win, but they're not going to win.
Oh, they don't even have a chance. It's so sad. And they're so hairy and adorable and probably quite stinky. This is Kennedy Saves the World. Don't go anywhere.
This is Jimmy Fallon, inviting you to join me for Fox Across America, which might be the only place you can hang out with 10 other people and not get arrested these days. Listen live at noon Eastern or get the podcast at foxacrossamerica.com.
What I'm wondering, and I guess the ultimate question is, does there exist something outside of human nature called good and called evil. So you are going to have a certain ratio of one of those two things in your being. Is there the idea that there are, if someone is able to build that type of craft, then they have, higher functioning brains or whatever bundle of equipment they have that allow them to make decisions. So if they are that reasonable, or if they are that rational, if they are hyper scientific, would the natural assumption be that they are good thinkers and therefore they are good?
Yeah, well, I admire the optimism, Kennedy. I mean, the idea that these societies that are much more advanced than ours, would be peace-loving and probably sit around gazing at their navels and playing video games all day long. I mean, maybe. I mean, that was certainly the view of Carl Sagan. He thought that advanced aliens would all have worked out the problems that we have. But look, to the extent that they're biological, and, the real aliens might not actually be living things at all.
Yes.
They might be machines. That's possible. But that's a different story. To the extent that they're biological, they're governed by Darwinian evolution. And Darwinian evolution isn't interested in good or bad. It's only interested in survival. So there's always room in any species for a few percent of the members of that species to be a little different. For example, I don't know what fraction of people in the United States are criminals. It's maybe a couple of percent. And they can do very well. It says crime doesn't pay, but crime can pay, actually. And that's just Darwinian evolution. It keeps trying different strategies. And, bad behavior might work out. So, if the aliens come here, maybe they're just going to read poetry to us. Maybe. But if you
that's really interesting. But you raise an interesting point, because if you've got a functioning, we'll call it a society, way far away, and whether they are carbon based or made of wires and platinum, who knows? Then maybe it's just the black sheep of the aliens. Like, the aliens are functioning. They've got the flying cars. They can live forever. They're fine. They've created whatever version of happiness that they're living within. So you got these breakaway black sheep. And so in our society, you say that, there are criminals. Well, you could argue that sometimes people engage in criminal behavior because there is mental illness, which, you could say is a non-normative defect. It is miswiring. And also people who combine that with drug abuse. I'm wondering if the aliens have some version of, rational defect. And if they've got drugs, what are their drugs like?
Well, I don't know, but I think you hit on a good point, that some fraction of them might not be very friendly. And looking at our own history, as it were, which were the members of society that actually got on the ships in the early 16th century and sailed to the United States to meet the natives, right? It wasn't the peace-loving guys or, the local butcher or anything like that. It was mostly military guys trying to make a career for themselves. So they tended to be very aggressive. So, yeah, on that basis, you'd say if we meet the aliens, there's maybe a greater chance you would meet the more aggressive members of their society.
That's a really good point. I mean, and if you look at the evolution of societies throughout human history, or anatomically modern humans, you see that the people who get to write history are the ones who infected other people or were very aggressive and took their stuff and had great technology, and they were able to subjugate people like that. So last question, bottom line, if the aliens are here and they're mean, what are the 3 things that I absolutely need to save myself?
I think you need a lot of frozen food, stuff in cans. You need to pick somebody that you can stand to live with for a long time and head for the hills. That's what I would suggest, because if they come here and they're not friendly, it's better to be in a safe place. That's my take.
All right. So I want to be a hoarding mole with someone super sexy, which, hopefully is down the line so I can dust off that sex robot. Dr. Seth Shostak, I want to thank you for your time. This has been a fascinating conversation, and certainly there's so much we don't know. We will have to continue it later. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you, Kennedy.
Very good. This has been Kennedy Saves the World, and the world may be ending, but at least we had this good time. Goodbye. I'm Kennedy.
For more podcasts from my friends at Fox, you can go to foxnewspodcast.com. You can subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Oh, go ahead and leave me a review while you're there. I'd love to hear what you have to say. You've been listening to Kennedy Saves the World on the Fox News Podcast Network.